to Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench. We talk about math, science, history, trains, and of course do it with some very fun activities. Hi, I'm Bob Lettenberger, Mr. Bob, Director of Education for the National Railroad Museum. And today our question on Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench is, what time is it? Some of us use our phones to tell what time it is. Some of us still have a wristwatch that we use. You might even look at a wall clock to see what time it is. But today, all of our times are standardized. If we're in one state, generally we're in a single time zone. We have different time zones across our country that take up large portions of our nation, but before 1883, time in our country was generally told by the sun. When the sun was straight overhead, that meant it was noon, 12 p.m. Depending on where you were, further east or west, that variance of when the sun reached its peak overhead for noon varied ever so slightly, sometimes by vast distances. Also, before 1883, there were some towns that set their own time. Can you see how this might be relatively confusing? In fact, here in Wisconsin, we had over 30 different time zones before 1883, just in Wisconsin. Wow. If you look at the diagram here that I have on our screen from 1857, which shows time in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, we can see that when it was noon, 12 p.m. in Washington, in Baltimore, Maryland, which is slightly to the east and about 90 miles away, it was actually considered to be 12:02. At the same time, in Wisconsin, Milwaukee was showing a time of 11:17 in the morning. And if we go to the western side of Wisconsin, noon in Washington, D.C. was actually 11:18 in the morning over in Prairie du Chien. Already you can see the difference in time just within the state of Wisconsin. Can you imagine if you were trying to catch a train? It might be a little confusing to get to the station at the right time. Safety also became an issue. If your train was to be running on a certain schedule, how would you know when you were supposed to be in a specific town based on the schedule if everybody's time zone was different? Well, in 1883, railroad superintendents here in our country got together and developed the time zones, basically the same ones that we use today. They divided the country into 4 time zones: the East, the Central, the Mountain, and the Pacific. And they based these time zones around lines of longitude, the lines that divide our Earth from top to bottom. The Eastern time zone centered around the 75th line of longitude. The 90th was the marker for the Central time. Mountain time was based around the 105th, and the 120th was used for Pacific time. Of course, setting of time zones, although it put us all on an even footing as far as time was concerned, each zone 1 hour apart from each other, so that if in the East it is noon, that meant in the Central it was 11, 10 o'clock in the Mountain time zone, and 9 o'clock in the Pacific. These time zones were still man-made or arbitrary, if you will. And even as we see by 1913, there were some adjustments made, especially here in the Pacific, a very obvious one. The Pacific time zone was extended by the railroads all the way down to El Paso, Texas. Well, you might ask, why would this be so? The Southern Pacific Railroad has a line that runs right along the southern border of the United States, and they wanted their main line to be all in the same time zone. Hence that extension. Now, today, the National Institute of Standards and Technology maintains the time standard for our country. And if you go to their website, you can find this page that has live clocks indicating current time in each one of the time zones across our country. Of course, today we also have daylight savings time, where we move time back or forth by an hour to accommodate outdoor activities. Again, as I mentioned, time zones are arbitrary. They're man-made. So there are some places in our country, say such as Arizona or Hawaii, that don't observe daylight savings time. So a little bit about time zones. and how and why we have them here in our country, and the fact that they're a railroad invention. It's time for you to do a little more with time zones. If you go to our website, nationalrrmuseum.org, go to the Education tab, look for the Virtual Activity Zone. Scroll down, you'll find Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench, and under today's episode, there's an activity sheet for you to further explore the time zones here in the United States. Hope you got time for it. You know, at the National Railroad Museum, it's our mission to inspire lifelong learning by providing dynamic educational opportunities through the preservation of railroad objects, engaging exhibits, and innovative programs. As a nonprofit organization, the National Railroad Museum is supported by both public and private donations and by our museum members. For more information how you can support the National Railroad Museum or become a museum member, stop by our website, nationalrrmuseum.org. Hey, I'm Mr. Bob. Thanks for stopping by Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench. We hope to see you again real soon. Make some time for it.